Hi, I'm Megan Coe,
And I'm Sidhu.
and today we're here to talk to you about key takeaways from our audit of county contracting with minority and women-owned businesses. So what do we mean when we say pro-equity contracting? In our audit, pro-equity contracting means contracting with businesses that are either small, owned by people who identify as women, Black, Indigenous, or people of color, or both. In short, it means contracting with businesses that have at least one of the following certifications. The first is Small Contractors and Suppliers, or SCS. King County's Business Development and Contract Compliance Office issues SCS certifications based on size. The SCS program is race and gender neutral because size is its main criteria. The second certification is what the state calls Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprises, or MWBEs. Unlike SCS, this certification depends on the owner's race or gender. And as you see in this graphic, there's some, but not complete overlap between the two certifications. We talk about them together because King County has strategic equity goals to increase procurement spending with both SCS and MWBE firms. So what did we find when looking at pro-equity contracting? We found first that implementation of pro-equity goals was focused on small contractors and suppliers since there was no process owner to ensure the county increased spending with minority and women-owned businesses. Second, that county agencies monitored spending with small businesses inconsistently, leading to revenue that for small firms being lost. And finally, we found that there were racial disparities in county spending with SCS businesses that disadvantaged Black-owned firms. I'm going to walk through the first 2 points and then hand it over to Anu. In King County, many agencies work on pro-equity contracting, but without clear roles and responsibilities, these agencies are unlikely to coordinate effectively to meet strategic equity goals. What did the roles look like when we started our audit? County agencies choose which equity goals to focus on, while the Office of Equity and Social Justice tracked progress with limited capacity and authority to gather information and drive change. Meanwhile, BDCC focused on monitoring the SCS program, which is race and gender neutral. Procurement and payables govern contracting as a whole, leaving pro-equity contracting to BDCC. Despite the efforts of these agencies, there was no clear lead to make sure spending with MWBEs increased over time. Meanwhile, both the City of Seattle and the State of Washington had these leads. We recommend that the county designate a process owner, and in response, the county executive issued an executive order affirming the Finance and Business Operations Division as the process owner with support from BDCC and Procurement and Payables. A process owner will be pivotal since current data indicates that there is room to improve. As you can see on the left here, in 2019, the county spent $1 billion on goods and services, and to the right, more than $200 million each on consulting and construction. The most recent available data for spending with minority and women-owned businesses from 2018 shows no more than $12 million going to any of these contracting areas, accounting for between 1% and 5% of total contracting dollars. Another reason we know that the county has room to improve is that MWBEs still face barriers to public contracting. Barriers include difficulty accessing information on upcoming contracts, accessing enough insurance coverage, and meeting strict criteria on work experience. While some county agencies work proactively to overcome these barriers that limit opportunities for qualified firms, others need training and tools to make public contracting more accessible. To boost staff capacity to remove these persistent barriers, the county needs to collaborate with stakeholders to develop guidance, training, and tools for county staff making contracting decisions. Guidance should include information on when and how to monitor spending on pro-equity contracting. This is because agencies that regularly monitor SCS spending get better results. Before I show a breakdown by agency, I want to explain what I mean by that. SCS requirements are percentages of contract value set aside for SCS firms. For example, a $50,000 contract with an SCS requirement of 10% would have a prime contractor set aside $5,000 of work for an SCS subcontractor. Achieving 100% of this SCS requirement would mean the full $5,000 went to the firm. Looking at data from July 2015 and June 2020, we found that agencies that monitored their pro-equity contracts more consistently met more of their SCS requirements. For example, Roads at the top of this table was the only agency that regularly monitored SCS spend, and it met more than 90% of its SCS requirements. Solid waste and wastewater did limited monitoring and met more than 70% of their requirements. Meanwhile, several agencies that left SCS monitoring to BDCC did worse. In other words, as the level of monitoring increased, so did the percentage of SCS requirements met. Still, no agency met 100% of their SCS requirements, so we wanted to know how much revenue small firms lost as a result. We made a conservative estimate that SCS firms lost nearly $2 million in revenues based on BDCC's log of contracts with SCS violations between 2017 and mid-2020. Because of the potential for negative impacts on small businesses, County Code outlined sanctions for contractors that fail to meet SCS requirements, but contractors were never sanctioned for noncompliance. Lack of compliance was either due to BDCC not regularly monitoring SCS spending during the life of the contract, or county agencies reducing the scope or scale of the work. Monitoring of recertification was also a problem. SCS certification lasts for 3 years, after which businesses need to re-verify that they're still small enough to keep their SCS status. BDCC data showed that more than 40% of firms in the SCS directory had expired certifications. However, because the county uses presence in the SCS directory to determine SCS status, these expired firms were still receiving the same benefits as firms who were current on their SCS status. BDCC put in place new software to automatically remove expired firms from the directory starting in 2022. This software will not automatically remove firms whose certifications expired before the technology was implemented in April 2019. We recommend that BDCC work with agencies to ensure that actual SCS spending is monitored regularly and that sanctions are applied when necessary. We also recommend that BDCC remove expired firms from its small business directory. Now, Anu will discuss racial disparities in county spending on small businesses.
Thanks, Megan. Now we're going to talk about racial disparities we found in the small contractor and supplier, or SCS program. Small businesses were paid about $137 million between 2015 and 2020 through the program. This is in line with the program's goal to support small businesses. While the SCS program is designed to be race and sex neutral, we set out to assess how this program was doing relative to the county's equity and social justice goals to increase contract spend with minority and women-owned businesses. We found racial inequities in which SCS, or small contractors and suppliers, were receiving county contracts between July 2015 and June 2020. For example, though white-owned SCS firms made up 65% of the total directory of firms, they received 75% of the county contracts with SCS requirements. In contrast, Black-owned small contractors and suppliers accounted for 12% of total firms, but made up only 7% of contracts. Latinx or Hispanic-owned firms made up 6% of SCS firms, but only received 3% of the contracts. We found that the overrepresentation of white-owned firms and underrepresentation of Black and Hispanic or Latinx-owned firms to be statistically significant, meaning that based on their representation in the directory, we would have expected Black and Hispanic or Latinx firms to receive more contracts than they did. So what does this mean in terms of contract dollars? Well, the differences in contracting for Black-owned businesses might have been equivalent to millions of dollars over 5 years. For example, while Black-owned small contractors and suppliers received 7% of county contracts, they received only 4%, or about $4.5 million, of the $137 million provided to SCS firms. In contrast, white-owned small contractors and suppliers received 83% of the dollars, even though they make up 75% of the total contracts. Now, why might Black-owned businesses be receiving fewer contract dollars? One reason might be that they're less likely to be chosen as prime contractors. As a prime contractor, a firm leads a project and typically earns more than their subcontractors. Based on a representative sample, we found that between July 2015 and June 2020, white-owned SCS businesses won, on average, 38% of the time they bid on county contracts as primes. In contrast, BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, and People of Color-owned SCS firms won, on average, 25% of the time they bid. Within BIPOC-owned businesses, the difference is most pronounced among Black-owned businesses, who won, on average, less than 17% of the time they bid, lower than any other racial or ethnic group. You might be wondering, what are the reasons for these inequities? Racial inequities in contracting may occur for a variety of reasons, including systemic ones. However, without ongoing tracking of these inequities, it's difficult to know whether mitigating strategies work to reduce them. For example, the county recently implemented an Equity and Social Justice Innovation Plan, which applies minority and women-owned business, or MWBE, goals on select county contracts with the aim of increasing spending with these businesses. Tracking outcomes on these contracts can help determine whether these efforts are effective and under what circumstances, which can inform continuous improvement. In order to know whether efforts to close equity gaps work, we recommend that BDCC track racial inequities in contract spend on an ongoing basis. Under state law, the county functions within a race and sex neutral legal environment. So what does this mean in terms of what the county can do for pro-equity contracting? In short, this means a county cannot have race or sex conscious contracting programs, meaning mandatory MWBE requirements on its contracts, unless it conducts a formal disparity study. A disparity study assesses, quantifies, and evaluates the prevalence, significance, and scope of race or sex-based discrimination in the marketplace. These studies are designed per federal requirements, which specify that governments must find strong evidence of a significant market disparity before they can put race and sex-conscious contracting practices in place. The county has not yet conducted a disparity study that could allow it to use race and sex-conscious contracting practices. Now, a disparity study alone is not a guarantee that the county will be allowed to implement race and sex-conscious programs. Instead, there are many opportunities that the county may need to exhaust before it could do this, such as establishing voluntary MWBE benchmarks and goals on its contracts. The recent executive order includes steps to apply voluntary MWBE goals on select contracts countywide, as well as discusses opportunities for a future disparity study at the county, which is in line with recommendations in our report. Given the recommendations we've outlined in our report and the steps that FBOD and BDCC are already taking to mitigate inequities, we recommend that the county create a roadmap on how to address racial inequities in its contracts. If inequities persist following mitigating efforts, Then we recommend the county conduct a formal disparity study that could allow it to use race and sex conscious strategies in order to meet its strategic goals. To recap, as we discussed, we had 3 major findings in this report. First was that the process owner responsible for ensuring that the county meets its goal of increasing spending with minority and women-owned businesses, making it difficult to measure progress. Second was that agencies monitor spending with SCS businesses inconsistently, leading to lost revenues for firms. Lastly, we found racial inequities in how much the county spends with SCS businesses, benefiting white-owned businesses more than Black-owned businesses. Full report can be found on our website. Thank you very much.